Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about the 7 Hz Crinacle Salnotes Dioko. So very long name, still a low price at $99 at Linsoul, and I do want to thank 7 Hz and Linsoul for sending this Dioko to me. So this is what the box looks like real quick. It's got nice color pictures and the Crinacle 7 Hz Dioko sticker on the side. It's really just a vessel to hold the very, very nice Salnotes 7 Hz case, which on the inside you'll find a little pocket for your tips and a nice plush interior to keep everything scratch-free and safe. So this is what it looks like up close. I don't see enough pictures of the cable. The cable is actually very nice. As a cable fan, this is actually a very nice width for a 4-core. So you kind of get that copper and silver-plated copper look and twisted together into 4 cores. And it's not very chunky at all. It's actually, probably barely a little wider or thicker than an 8 core. But I do think it's actually a quite nice cable that you don't see all that often with people using Dioko. So let's kind of jump into it. And I'm going to, once again, try to speed up the whole review process and try not to speak for 20 minutes as people, including myself, do not want to hear me talk about anything for 20 minutes. So we'll try to step through this quicker. So number one, this is the too long, did not watch. For those of you who don't want to spend 20 minutes listening to me talk, we'll try to hit these areas up close or right up front. So right out of the bat, I think Dioko sort of succeeds and it sounds like a planar. And that sounds very obvious because there's obviously a planar driver in here, and of course it would sound like a planar. But what I really mean is that they didn't really try to tune out some of those planar capabilities that people buy planars for. And yeah, it sounds obvious, but this one sounds like a planar. It's got the technicalities, the detail, the resolution, a little bit of edge to it that very much people are buying planars for, and they did not try to tune it away or make it sound like a hybrid or some weird overdampened set. So sort of give them props for making a planar sound like a planar and why people buy them. So will it hang with Timeless or S12? I think it does. It's, that driver is very capable, but it is tuned a little differently. And the high points on Dioko, I will say it's value, right? I said $99. I think it is a good value for what it is. Hopefully that price stays at the same or it gets a bit lower as more competition hits the market. But it is very clean, a technical sound, but relaxed, less forward gain area and beyond. For those of you who have Timeless, you'll sort of recognize that Timeless was just a little bit forward in that gain area and treble as well. And I sort of brought this back down to Dioko, and it's a little bit more of a easy listening set, and I have no problems with that. The low points, definitely not for mid-bass heads. People who are really into mid-bass, this one is not for you. Or people who like to groove. If you don't know what that really means, take a look at Earth, Wind & Fire's Let's Groove. That song, the vocals should really be sitting on top of that bass line, and it's very much a nice mid-bass line, and it just sounds like the vocals are a bit floating. They sort of left those vocals hanging. And again, this isn't really a good or bad topic. It's just people either like a lot of mid-bass or don't like a lot of mid-bass. But for those of you who are not fans of a whole lot of mid-bass, then this one is right up your alley. So do I wreck it? I do. It has this addictive planar-like quality that all the planars, whether it's an S12 or a Timeless, I love that planar sound, and this one gives you that planar sound. Is it my end game? Probably not. Is it better than Timeless? Probably not, unless you really like that less mid-bass, and then, yeah, it's probably better than Timeless for you. If you thought Timeless had too much bass in general, then Dioko is kind of right up your alley as well. So this point of consideration, how do you decide on Dioko versus Timeless or other planar sets? And a lot of it is really going to come down to this mid-bass and whether you think it's too lean. What's your preference? Do you like more mid-bass, less mid-bass? If you like to groove, you definitely like more mid-bass. So this one is right on the edge. So definitely tilt it in the direction that you prefer, whether that's tip rolling or using a source that's more analog or warmer. And turning it up, I think, actually helps out quite a bit as well. I definitely tend to turn this one up quite a bit, and you tend to get a little more mid-bass out of it by doing so. So, like I said, it's just not for people who like more mid-bass. So sound-wise, not really a surprise. It sounds like a relaxed, mid-bass, leaner, cooler, timeless. So let's look at the graph super quick. And you can kind of see the changes that Crinacle really put into here versus timeless. So timeless, the blue line, again, it actually was quite a bass-heavy set. Not as heavy as it looks. I think planar bass tends to really support a higher level like this without really intruding into the mids or damaging the mids or the vocals. It can really hang with this really nice bass level there. So Dioko takes this lower route, and for those of you who are fans of Crinacle tuning, you'll recognize this sort of immediately, is that sort of his, neutral to his ears level of bass. It doesn't have a whole lot of mid bass at all, sort of scooped out, and he pushes a lot of the energy out to the sub bass, which is sort of not found as much in tracks normally. So the sub bass exists. Out here, you get some depth from it, but as far as clean and clear mids, that's what this kind of scoop out gives you, and very nice mids. And then the gain, he sort of took this down a little bit. Again, this is a very much an easier listening set, and I sort of agree with those changes. They really work for me. This whole bringing the bass down and bringing the gain down at the same time, that is something that I talked about, especially with Zero, as you can see in this green line. So Zero had sort of a similar bass line, but a much more elevated, close to Harmon gain area, and that's probably just a hair too bright for me. So for me, Dioko sort of sits in that perfect place for what I like to listen to in long sessions. So I have to say, I sort of these changes actually do work for me, and I think Dioko is this nice balance of planar details, resolution, and a long session comfort and value, of course, because the price is actually quite reasonable for planar drivers. So the bass, so it's okay, and look, I'm not going to harp on the mid bass again, but it's just not the most detailed generally for my music listening, just because of the decreased level of mid bass. It's really hard to hear a whole lot of details in the bass until you go pretty far into the sub bass and turn on your heavy sub bass test tracks. You'll sort of get a lot of more detail, but just due to the level, and maybe I'll call this one a little less than neutral in the bass, and pushing some energy out to the sub bass, it sounds all nice, but I wouldn't call it the most detailed bass. It just won't slam as hard, and it's slightly sterile, but I think why people like this tuning, and I think probably why Crinacle tunes this way, is that finesse in the leaner bass curve really sets you up for beautiful mids and vocals. And if you want a little more bass, do tip roll. But as far as why this tuning works for lots of people, I think that's really why it works. You just get super clean sound, and you don't have the bass fatigue. You don't have bass boosted too much. Bring it all down and really just put it right under the mids, so the mids really stand out and sparkle. And that's exactly what this kind of tuning works, and why it works for lots of people. So the mids, like we're talking about, planar detail, technicalities, plus cleaner planar bass level, you're really talking about a clean, clear, lightweight, cool mids. These are not warm, thick mids. These are very much lightweight, fast, sort of on the cool side. There's not a lot of warmth there. And with a more neutral source, it definitely leans a little more analytical. I wasn't really a huge fan of even my TRI TK2. I would say it's a little too neutral for this set. I definitely like something a little warmer. And while the upper mids, like we talked about, were brought down a bit for easier listening, and I think that all works. I think the balance with the bass works. It's still going to be a little bit unforgiving on bad recordings and thin voices. And I think you see this in a lot of reviews on Dioko, was people said, oh, there's this thing in the treble, it's a little bit sibilant. There's just, a little bit of planar timbre into the Dioko. And for me, I sort of caught it on bad recordings and thin voices, so I would just say it's a little bit unforgiving, as opposed to saying that there's some, strange problem out in the treble. I think it's just recording wise didn't really have a good synergy with Dioko. So I do prefer the acoustics to electronics here. A track like Rolling Stones, Wild Horses, I think when everything comes together on Dioko, the stage and the separation and the imaging and that high detail is very much an experience. And that's why I said planars are sort of addictive, and Dioko is no different. This was sort of, I really meant that. It's addictive like a planar. There's just some times and some tracks where you're just listening to it and it takes you there, and you forget about the driver, you forget about listening to your gear, and you just enjoy the music. And Dioko does that. Even though I'll complain about the mid bass once or twice, this one still takes me there, and I sort of lose all the issues and just focus on enjoying the music. So that is sort of a big reason why I do recommend this one, and it definitely does give me an experience. So the vocals definitely range from slightly recessed to forward, and I don't necessarily think it's recessed at all, but you will find tracks where it's a little recessed and we're too forward. But it's really hard to characterize them as one or the other. It's sort of a range. Treble wise, if Timeless had a more forward treble, presented a more planar timbre sheen, is what I think people call it these days. Instead of BA timbre, now you get planar timbre. There's just a little extra there on top of instruments, and I think that's kind of this planar sheen. So Dioko does roll, I think, both of those back, and I think it does work. I'm just a fan of bringing that whole treble area down just slightly, and it just works for me and my ears and my tracks. That rawness to Timeless also toned back a little bit. I think just showing more control and more restraint rather than trying to really push that planar resolution and detail was very much the right move on Dioko, and I very much like that change. So you can certainly say it's not the most detail resolving set, but what it is just an easier to listen to longer term set, and that very much works for me. So I do love the levels on Christopher Cross Sailing. It's another song that you listen to on lots of sets, but when you hear it on a planar and you hear all the instruments and that detail and resolution at that price, it sort of blows me away. And it's just another track where you forget all this and you're just like, man, this track sounds really good on this one set. It just becomes an experience, and you forget about reviewing and criticizing. So stage-wise, I think it does inherit some of that lack of depth from Timeless. There are times when the vocals become forward or there's too much treble and the whole thing flattens just the way Timeless does. But I think it happens less often than what it does on Timeless. And I think it's just that lower treble works for me and a lower gain works for me, and it just gives you a little more sense of depth. So, I think most cases, I think Dioko sort of works for me in the stage. And occasionally you'll just find that old Timeless flattening of it, but I think generally the separation and the layering and the imaging, they all just work on this set, and you'll of course find the occasional track where it doesn't work, but for me, I think just hitting next sort of took me to a better track, and I think all planars in this first generation are all going to exhibit some sense of all these issues on staging and imaging and separation. And as 7 Hertz and other companies work on their planars, I think you'll see some of those problems iron out and get better in the future. But for now, at the price, I'm not going to really nitpick it all that much. So that's what I got on Dioko. I definitely like this one. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you next time.